Surviving the Applewhites, Chapter 25. Edie woke early, dreading her father's call to Mrs. Montrose. She tried for a while to go back to sleep, but she couldn't. Finally, she decided that she didn't want to face catastrophe on an empty stomach, so she pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and headed downstairs to fix herself something to eat. Destiny was already up. She could hear him in the kitchen singing Do, Re, Mi. That's right, she thought. Destiny can sing a whole lot better than Priscilla Montrose. She hoped what Jake had said would turn out to be true, that there would be a show for Destiny to sing in. When she got to the kitchen, it was the butterfly she noticed first, standing on a saucer full of purple syrup, its wings moving delicately, its long tube of a tongue arched into the liquid. Then she noticed a puddle of purple syrup on the counter and a bowl in the middle of the puddle. And then she noticed Destiny. He had a purple-stained towel around his shoulders and purple syrup in his hair and running down over his ears and neck. He stopped singing and grinned at her. "Isn't it beautiful? His name is Blackie, and he stayed in my room the whole night. He rode down on my shoulder, and I fed him. He is the bestest pet I ever had. Why did you put syrup in your hair?" "That lady said Kool-Aid won't wash out. Jake washes all my other colors out. Now my hair gets to stay purple while Jake's gets to stay red." Edie had her brother on a stool by the sink with his head under the faucet when her father came in. As much of a mess as the sticky purple syrup had made, it had not turned Destiny's hair purple. Almost all the color washed out, leaving his white blonde hair with just the tiniest tinge of lavender. His hands and his ears were another thing altogether. They were stained a deep purpley gray, and his fingernails were almost black. Randolph stood in the doorway and looked. Edie braced herself for his reaction. But her father let out a long, dramatic sigh. "I suppose this is what comes of getting up in the middle of the night," he muttered, as he set about making a pot of coffee. The butterfly fluttered into the philodendron. "Might as well get it over with," Randolph said when he'd drunk his coffee. He went off to make the call to Mrs. Montrose. Edie scrubbed and scrubbed Destiny's hands and fingernails with soap and a nail brush until most of the color was gone, but she dared not take the brush to his ears. They were apparently going to have to fade on their own. When her father came back 10 minutes later, he was shaking his head. "It would have been interesting, integrating a purple-eared boy named Hans into the show." "She canceled it?" Edie asked. "She canceled it." "Did you try to reason with her?" "Reason? With her? She started babbling like a maniac, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. She said I had violated her trust and the trust of an innocent and impressionable 8-year-old child. What do you suppose she meant by that? I never promised that rich little girl would get the part." Edie had never fully explained what she'd told the woman on the phone when she invited her to dinner. She decided this was not a good time to do so. "I tell you, the more that woman talked, the more berserk she got. Something about fried chicken and false pretenses and crazed wild animals endangering her child's life. I couldn't get her to stop, so finally I just hung up on her." As the news of the cancellation spread around Wits End, it was as if someone had lit a string of firecrackers. One after another came the explosions. Nobody blamed Mrs. Montrose. They blamed Randolph. "You never once think of anyone except yourself," she heard her mother say. "It's not as if it's a Broadway production. What harm could that little girl have done to the show?" All Edie caught of her father's answer was the phrase, "artistic integrity." Zedediah, who was usually the solid rock under her family's waves, raged about the customers he had put on hold in order to build sets instead of furniture and the cost of raw materials they had used from the woodshop. He sounded more like Polly than himself. Archie yelled about not having time to finish 2 of his pieces for his gallery show. Cordelia was the most dramatic. She held her hands out to her father. "Look at them! fingers have bled, and I'm practically going blind from making ruffles for little girls' dresses. Besides all those ruffles and the choreography and teaching 25 people with 2 left feet how to waltz, I have hemmed 4 nuns' habits. Do you know how far it is around the bottom of a nun's habit? Jeremy Bernstein shrieked when he was told. Thanks to Randolph Applewhite, he said his television career was over. First my car, now my career, totaled! Totaled! Randolph pointed out that his TV career hadn't actually started yet, and Jeremy burst into tears. Jay clenched his fists. His face went almost as red as his hair, and he stormed off across the field with Winston following. Lucille, being Lucille, did not explode or shriek or cry. She got a faraway look in her eyes and went off to meditate. Govindaswamy was the only one entirely unmoved by the news. "Ah," he said gravely, "this will be a good thing. Everything works out for the highest good. Always this is so. You will see the universe works in mysterious ways." Edie went to the schoolroom and watched 2 more butterflies struggling to break free of their gray-brown cases. She couldn't help thinking about what Govindaswamy had said. It seemed stupid. Worse, it was mean. Everybody was miserable, and he was telling them that their misery was perfectly okay? How could any good, let alone the highest good, come from wasting all that time and effort? And what could be good about having to call people who had their hearts set on being in the show and telling them it was all off? Her father was going to call the leads, but as stage manager, she was the one who had to call the minor actors. She could hardly bring herself to think about it, much less do it. Govindaswamy talked like somebody out of one of those old black and white movies, she thought, where everything always turned around just in time for a happy ending. It was when she thought about those movies that the idea popped into her mind. Her father had rented one of them once about a theater company that lost its theater. They'd put on the show in a barn instead. Wits End had a barn. A big barn. They parked the cars in it sometimes, and the riding mower was there, but when it was empty, it was really quite a lot like a theater, except it didn't have a stage or seats or lights. Maybe they could fix that. They'd have to build a stage and find some lights and some sound equipment and some chairs for the audience. They'd have to do publicity, sell tickets. Could they? If they could, Jeremy wouldn't have to give up his television career. The network people might like the story even better this way. Art's struggling against impossible odds. Today was Friday, October 10th. The original opening day had been set for the 24th. 2 weeks away. 14 days. Edie went to find her father.